Okay, welcome to the Center for American Progress. My name is Andrew Sherry. I'm the Vice President for Online Communications. And thank you for attending this event on Web 2.0 and the federal government. Now, I'm not surprised that we have a full house today and that we have more people watching on the web stream or following this event on Twitter. The hashtag is Gov20, by the way. Because we're in a moment and a place where we can sense that there's some big transformative forces converging. On the political side, we have an administration that's pledged to use openness and accountability as a key way to restore people's faith in government. And then on the business side, we have a vast array of technologies that one of our panelists is credited for naming Web 2.0 that are by nature flexible, interoperable, and participatory. So expectations are really high that this will be the breakthrough point for more participatory, effective government. But at the same time, the web and the federal government grew up in different neighborhoods. Their culture's different. They don't play by the same rules. So if we want to bridge that gap and make sure that these forces actually mash up and not just collide, we have to look at the real concrete issues that are at the intersection of these two. So that's why it's a pleasure for me to introduce Peter Swire on your left, who will be moderating today's panel and who authored the 3 reports that are being released today and will be part of the conversation. Now, Peter's a senior fellow at CAP and a law professor at The Ohio State University. He's an expert on technology and privacy, having served as President Clinton's chief counselor on privacy at OMB, and have gone on to tackle privacy and technology issues as they apply to things like domestic surveillance, computer security, e-commerce, and other issues. But what makes Peter especially qualified to lead this event is that he was present when Web 2.0 met the federal government head-on most visibly. As a member of the Obama-Biden transition team, he was counsel to the White House New Media Team as they created Change.gov and then the revised WhiteHouse.gov. So he put his legal and government experience to good use, helping the new media staffers shift from the speed of the campaign to the analog devices, executive branch security rules, and all the responsibilities of actually governing. So, Peter, thanks very much.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to talk just for a few minutes about the 3 papers that are up on the AmericanProgress.org website, and then I'll introduce our panelists, and then we'll have a discussion I'm really looking forward to. First thing to note is I did work on the transition. All of the things that I say here are entirely my own views. They're in absolutely no way a reflection of the transition that was or statements of the government. And we're also not releasing any non-public information here. This is based on things you can see by looking at WhiteHouse.gov and what the administration's been up to. So briefly to just talk about the 3 papers. The first one's called It's Not the Campaign Anymore. And it has to do with how many cool and fun things you could do in the campaign, and then only a subset of those can you do when you're in the federal government. The paper talks about 3 reasons why things are a lot tougher once you get to the White House. The first one is scale. Right? It's just sort of obvious that the number of people who will friend you or the number of comments can dwarf the staff. And it's been publicly reported that the Obama campaign had a new media team at about 90 people the day the campaign ended, and depending how you count, it's about 8 or 10 today. So you get into government, you get new real estate in the White House complex, but it's not nearly as big as it was before. A second issue that's a lot more important is what federal government people call clearance. During the campaign, if you call up your North Korea expert, that person's going to be eager to talk to you. You have a press inquiry. They're going to give an answer. They'll turn it around quickly. If you have a North Korea question to the White House blog, the people doing North Korea might be busy, negotiating or trying to stop problems with North Korea. They don't necessarily answer right away. And then maybe you give your best guess of what the answer should be on today's crisis in North Korea. Well, what if the guess is wrong and they launch missiles and the city gets blown up? I mean, that really you'd feel very bad as the Web 2.0 person if you just ruined a city by having a missile hit. And that's a little bit constraining, right? That makes you just a little bit nervous before you just sort of answer in your sort of cool, interactive Web 2.0 kind of way. A third challenge once you're in government is, or in a campaign, it goes like this. On a campaign, 5 teenagers say, hey, we've got a pickup truck. We're going to drive out to some neighborhood. Can we be part of the campaign? And the answer is sure, yeah, go ahead. Use your useful energy and enthusiasm. When it's the government, though, you don't give them a little White House badge and send them out to the neighborhood. It's still 5 teenagers in a pickup truck. You don't want them acting on your behalf because you don't have control. They might do something crazy. They might act like teenagers. So this idea of delegation, the problem of clearance, are much harder once you're in government. What has the White House done to fix that or to address that? One thing they've done is that they don't say very many words back through the supposedly interactive media, right? Because saying words back is scary. One of the things they have is a lot of voting systems. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Which questions should we use? If everyone else is voting, the White House doesn't have to give answers to all those questions. Another thing they can do is what's called sampling, right? So the president receives 10 emails or letters every day. That gives him a feel for outside of the Beltway, but he isn't overwhelmed by scale. A third thing you can do is you can do things yourself where you control it. And the White House has done lots of video. But video is just 2-minute clips, and you can handle the content. And then a fourth thing you can do is every now and then you can tell your senior staff you're going to have to work hard and read 10,000 comments. And so that's what's happening right now with the Open Government Initiative that Beth Novak and others have led. But you can't do it all the time. And so there's a constraint, and when we get into the panel discussion, we're going to talk about what to do with that constraint. But here's a way to think about it. If you understand that scale and clearance and delegation are big problems in the White House, then if you're the techies, if you're the political theorist trying to figure it out, now you know what some of the constraints are, and maybe you can go try to fix it. The other papers I'll just touch on very lightly. There's a paper on procurement called How Do You Buy Free Software, and which is the government in 2.0. The one point I'd like to highlight there is that you don't need federal dollars to sign up for Facebook. It's not a procurement moment. But there's still a risk that the government will make choices, get locked in, maybe endorse things too much. And so one answer is to use 2.0 to control 2.0, to have public comment functions from other vendors, from interested people in the public, et cetera, so that if there seems to be a less good way that they're doing Web 2.0, you should have a good comment function to improve it. The third paper is 6 hurdles to Web 2.0. That's a more detailed sort of lawyerly thing going through privacy, Section 508 disabilities, a lot of issues. Here's one that I'd just like to highlight. Security in the federal government. So some agencies don't want to let their people use Facebook or use other things. They're afraid there might be apps attached that cause problems. That's a security problem. But it's also a problem if you don't let it happen. Imagine you're the media shop, the communications shop, and you can't use 2.0 media from your desktop because the security people said it's not secure. That's a problem. Maybe we'll hear how the State Department handles it, but you can just imagine there need to be ways to move forward with these cool things without the lawyers saying no too quickly. And so the goal from these papers is to show what some of the constraints are, to show there's reasons to be enthusiastic here, and let's try to figure out how to dream and build this stuff while recognizing the constraints. So with that, I'm going to turn to introducing our 3 fantastic panelists, and I'll do it alphabetically. In the middle of our 3 folks up here is Tim O'Reilly, who's the founder and CEO of O'Reilly Media, which is a major computer book publisher, as many of you know. Among other things, Tim has often been attributed to having invented the term Web 2.0, which is pretty good, except it turns out, we heard out before, it's not true. A guy named Dale, last name Doherty? Dale Doherty, who works with Tim, came to him with this word 2.0, and Tim put it out as an O'Reilly conference, and it spread just a little bit. So this is a meme that has succeeded, and this is the meme master right here who's going to help with insights today. Alec Ross, to my far right, to your left, currently serves at the State Department as Senior Advisor to Secretary Clinton for Innovation. I got to know Alec during the Obama campaign when he was a co-leader of the Technology Committee with Julius Janikowski, and he was later in the transition. But prior to diving into this amazing craziness, he co-founded One Economy, a nonprofit that helps connect low-income people to the tools of the digital age. And so Alec is leading the State Department's efforts to figure out how to use these technologies. Our third panelist is Faiz Shakir, our very own from the Center for American Progress. He's the research director for the Progress Report and thinkprogress.org. Think Progress rates very, very high on Technorati's monthly listings of most linked to blogs in the world. Faiz is a BA in government from Harvard and a JD from Georgetown Law Center. He's worked previously with the Democratic National Committee, with Senator Bob Graham, and is a communications aide in the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy. So how we're going to proceed is we're going to do our panel discussion in two segments. The first segment is going to feature Diplomacy 2.0, some of what's happening at the State Department. We'll do it back and forth with the panel, and then we'll open it to audience questions and also to Twitter and online questions. And we'll do that for roughly half an hour, and then we'll shift to some of the Web 2.0 issues that Tim O'Reilly and Faiz want to highlight. So I'm going to move over here. Shift as I do that. So, greetings. So, Alec, you're our leader here. What's Diplomacy 2.0? Are you going to be able to shake things up in that pinstripe world of the State Department?
Well, I think that things are already being shaken up pretty significantly. What we're calling this is 21st century statecraft, and it's actually it's a big move forward in terms of how the State Department engages with the wider world. And 21st century statecraft, briefly, is the application of information communications technology, so that we can go beyond government-to-government diplomacy, not end, obviously, government-to-government diplomacy, but enhance what we're doing to also include government-to-people, people-to-government, and people-to go from government to government to people, people to government, and people to people. And this is a huge, huge shift. And what I'd love to do is take just a few minutes to describe what I mean by that. So when you think about what government-to-government diplomacy is, we know what that has meant now for several hundred years. It more often than not is white guys with white shirts and red ties sipping tea out of a porcelain cup over a mahogany table, talking about what the interactions between one government and another should be. But what we've seen in these very early days of the Obama administration is an understanding and appreciation of new media tools so that we can figure out how to use some of our greatest assets, specifically our leaders, like the President, like Secretary of State Clinton, as well as our people, to help become diplomats in new and different ways. So first, government to people. Very early in the administration, President Obama made what was called the no ruse message. And what this was is this no ruse message was a message to the Persian-speaking people of the world. And it was done via online video. And it was a way of communicating with people throughout the world, including citizens of Iran, in ways in which hadn't been happening previously through government-to-government interactions with the government of Iran, which obviously we don't do. People-to-people. What is people-to-people diplomacy? Well, an example we saw just about 2 weeks ago where at the time where we announced $110 million in humanitarian aid to the Pakistani refugees in northwest Pakistan, we thought to ourselves, we said, okay, the United States can take out its checkbook and make very important investments to help with one of the largest humanitarian crises in recent memory. We're now up to about 2.3 million internally displaced persons in northwest Pakistan. We said it's great that the United States government is playing this role, but how can we empower the American citizens so that they can help in the relief? And what we came up with was a text messaging shortcode, so that if you text to 20222, short code, and text the word SWAT, S-W-A-T, after the SWAT Valley, a $5 donation will be made to the UNHCR, to the refugee relief for people in northwest Pakistan. So we thought to ourselves, all right, we can take our checkbook out and we can write a check for $110 million, but how can we get the American people to work with us and to directly connect with the Pakistani people? And it's already proven to be a success. And I got to tell you, somebody came up with the idea on a Thursday, and the following Tuesday it was being announced in the White House press briefing room. And it's notable because, first of all, it was a different platform for practicing diplomacy. We were using cell phones all of a sudden. Secondly, we were using the American people. And then thirdly, what was very gratifying was to see the government moving at internet speed. And so you have to be very judicious. You have to be careful. You have to be smart when you are performing diplomacy. This is a case where we saw an opportunity, where we were able to leverage the tools of technology that were able to make intervention happen lightning fast, and it happened. And so, the most notable thing about 21st century statecraft is that it's going to expand and it's going to enhance the way in which the United States government and its citizens can engage with the wider world. And we're very, very, very early into this administration, but we've already got some positive examples of what's happened. We already see that these things are working. Now, whenever the president or whenever the Secretary of State travel abroad, it's now a normal question to ask, oh, what can we do with new media? Oh, should we be doing an online town hall so that instead of just meeting with the president and foreign minister, they can engage with the wider community? So 21st century statecraft is something you're just beginning to hear about now, but I have a feeling you're going to be hearing a lot more about it in the years to come.
Well, first of all, thanks. I meant to mention this is the first public appearance you've made, Alex, since being in this to talk about it, and we're really appreciative you came here today.
Well, it's for you, Peter.
Yeah, I get a tip. Okay. Does the U.S. have an edge? I mean, part of the message of America is openness and freedom and all this. Do you see the United States diplomatically having some advantages in this space compared to other countries? Is that a way to think about it?
Well, we have a president in Barack Obama who I think is an extraordinary asset, an extraordinary global asset. We have Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who has a global approval rating of more than 70%. So in Barack Obama, in Vice President Biden, and in Secretary of State Clinton, we have three extraordinary assets who I think can practice global diplomacy in unique and important and powerful ways. So yeah, I mean, those three I'm certain constitute an edge. I also think that even though we are a global, even though the economy is globalizing, and even though so many important and powerful things are happening abroad in places like China and in places like India as they relate to information communications technology, the United States remains in the driver's seat in terms of innovation. And I think we lost some ground over the previous 8 years, and I think there's much now to be done. But I think there's an enormous amount of focus in this administration on innovation and on being willing to apply new tools to try to solve old problems. So I think that innovation is in our DNA, and I think that that also gives us a little bit of an edge.
Tim or Faiz, anything you want to react to?
I just wanted to follow up on the same point. Does our, with really maybe a follow-up to Peter's question, does our comfort level with open communications, as a country, fit in better with new media and is that part of the edge?
I think so. Now, government is rarely at the fore of the application of new media.
As a reflection of our culture, I mean, I guess, or do you find in some ways that's this sort of our export? Does new media come across some ways as the modern equivalent of the ugly American?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think that. And it also depends on how you define new media. So, I mean, mobile telephony obviously is a global phenomenon right now that I don't think is necessarily identified with the United States per se. I mean, there are about 3.3 billion mobile handsets on the planet. There are going to be about 4.5 billion mobile handsets by the end of 2010. I don't think that, and a lot of the time when we talk about new media, when we talk about pushing video, when we talk about pushing messages using new tools, I think a lot of the time that's going to be through the mobile phone. And I think that is not at all identified with the United States. When I think about what's happening in Japan and in Korea and in so many other places throughout the world, I think that they would identify with new media as much or more than we do. I haven't thought about this question in this way before, but just my gut is that I don't think the world is going to receive new media from us and thinking about that as an American form of communication. At least I hope not.
Okay. Faiz, anything you want to at this point?
Well, I'm actually interested in, Alec, from the Nowruz message.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder what kind of feedback did you get? I'm actually interested in the access. So I was concerned when you initially released the video that perhaps there were going to be a lot of people in the Persian-speaking world who may not have broadband to view the message, may not have the proper connectivity to go and access it, and may even not hear about it.
Right.
Can you maybe give us a download on what the fallout was? Were you able to reach the audiences that you were going for? Were there any issues there?
Sure. I mean, first of all, whenever you push a message through new media, one of the things that you're doing is you more likely than not are excluding an important segment of society. And as Peter mentioned during the introduction, what I've done for the last 10 years has actually not been related to government or to politics at all. I mean, I started a nonprofit with some friends, One Economy, the purpose of which was to help make wider scale access to broadband into the tools of the digital age. And so for me, this really hits very close to home. It's very, very important to me that we not ignore the issue of the digital divide and that we focus a lot of attention on the investment side to making sure that more of the globe's citizens are online, are accessing new media. And I would sort of point out two things as a response to that. One, I'll go back to mobile telephony. So I think that it's far likelier going to be the case that in the developing world, people are going to access the network, so to speak, through a smartphone than they are through a $1,500 laptop. That's where the data is pointing. When I travel abroad and when I see people in developing countries, they are likelier to have a smartphone through which they're watching video, through which they're accessing the web, than they are, in a $1,500 laptop they're popping open. The second thing is that I don't think we can wait for ubiquitous access to broadband, to devices, for the government to get out there. One virtue of the government is that it can be a demand driver. It is so big. The United States government is rarely surgical, but what it can do through its purchasing power, through the role it plays in the marketplace, through the demand that can be created by Barack Obama putting an online video out there. Barack Obama putting an online video out targeted to the Persian-speaking people of the earth, that's going to make Persian speakers want to go online. So I think that we can play a good role helping to catalyze demand to connect to the network.
I'm going to ask one question, then we'll open it up for some questions from the audience and from our online people. Karen Hughes had a public diplomacy function in the last administration, an effort for the State Department to get out there and speak to the people directly in the world. There were mixed reviews. There were sort of cool Twitter things that other people use or whatever. Is there something different here? Was that a sort of good first step? How do you?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to comment on Karen Hughes specifically because actually the role of public diplomacy, I think that there were 4 undersecretaries of public diplomacy at the State Department, of which Karen Hughes was one, and common to all of them and common to all of their predecessors was the goal of getting America's message out. So getting America's message out to the globe's citizens is nothing new. Some of the tactics are new. Some of the use of technology that began under Karen Hughes and began under James Glassman were some good first steps. What's new, I think, and I don't think it's unique to the State Department. I think we're seeing it throughout the Obama administration. We see it in the White House. We see it in the departments and the agencies. Is the prioritization of this. And this is something that took root during the campaign. President Obama was able to compete much more effectively because he and his leadership understood how to use technology as a way of organizing communities of interest so that people in West Pocatello, Idaho, who weren't necessarily going to get an Obama for America campaign office, they could organize and self-empower themselves. So the president and the president's senior staff understood and valued new media, understood and valued Web 2.0 from the early days of the administration. And what you're seeing is that value carrying through into the administration. And for it to be something that's so important that we appoint a chief technology officer, that we put people in each of our departments and agencies charged with innovation, it sort of elevates the importance of all of this stuff, so it's not peripheral. I think that's perhaps the biggest change with this administration.
Great. Let's go ahead and we'll take a couple questions. Go ahead. And identify yourself, please, if you would. There's a mic coming around. And could we keep it on the Diplomacy 2.0 part for now, and we'll have a second segment afterwards?
Absolutely. Andrew Feinberg with BroadbandCensus.com. Alec, good to see you again. You mentioned that you don't see a need to wait for ubiquitous broadband access to push out these Diplomacy 2.0, let's use that term, but do you see the State Department making any changes, or anywhere in the administration making changes in how we use our considerable foreign aid clout to maybe encourage adoption, build pipes while we build roads, that kind of thing, and really get more broadband out to places where it's not, even if there are more mobile phones?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a personal priority of mine. So in coming into government, having helped run an NGO, a relatively small NGO, we're about a 90-person, $15 million a year operation. In sort of global digital divide terms, we were huge. We got started in a basement and we became, the world's highest impact digital divide organization. But there were only 90 of us. And so now, being able to work at the State Department, I most certainly am not going to forget what I've spent the last 10 years doing. And it's going to be a personal priority of mine to think about how our aid programs can accelerate ubiquitous access to the network. And part of what's exciting to me about this is not the technology. I really don't care about the technology per se. What excites me is that piece of this which is about empowerment, which is one of the powerful things about ICT is that it devolves processing power to the individual. And as we are granting out dollars, as we are within our foreign aid programs, part of what should be a goal, part of what I know is a goal, is the empowerment of the individual at the village level, so to speak. And technology offers a very interesting and important way of creating empowerment at the individual level, whether it's the fisherman with a hole full of fish knowing which port to go to, whether it's the rickshaw driver that now, because he has a cell phone, is able to have a client base, whether it's people being able to connect to global e-marketplaces. That is what I think is most compelling about this. It's not so much that, we're going to build a 4G network or whatever it is, but
I think it's a really important point there. I think a lot of broadband thinking I think will look in retrospect a little bit like the bridge to nowhere in Alaska, where we say, oh yeah, we're going to bring high-speed internet to every little local community, and that may in fact not be the point, because of course it may be that the phone is what we need in the local community, and what we need is to figure out where to put data centers, where to put edge caching, and not actually broadband to the home so somebody in a little town can watch, download movies. So the question really is, what are the strategic investments that we should make in technology that really, A, enable the private sector, and B, enable this kind of peer-to-peer individual empowerment that you're talking about.
Okay, I'm going to this is a question that came in through our online viewers from Susanna Murley of carbonfund.org. She says, and this is a question especially for Alec first, interesting use of cell phone technology with the SWAT campaign, the 20222. Is that still running, by the way?
It is. So everybody here, text 20222. Text the word SWAT, S-W-A-T. Everybody here should do that. There are 200 people here. That's $1,000, and if that's $1,000 for refugee relief in Pakistan, and if you all do it 5 times, that's $5,000.
Okay, that's really perfect. That sets up the rest of the question really well.
There's a question?
Yeah. However, doesn't the cell phone provider take a big chunk of the funds when you do a campaign like this? Should cell phone providers make a profit off of American generosity? What can you do to control that?
$0, 0 cents. They got nothing. So. Thank you.
That's okay. That's a good answer. So that okay. Question in the audience. We have one in back. Was there a hand? Yes, please.
Yeah, hi. My name's Kathy Richey, and I'm working. I'm just delighted to see you here with your leadership is extraordinary. The amount of time you've been there and what you've been able to accomplish is really applause-worthy. So what I wanted to ask was about placement and staffing. It's very interesting to me to watch the Obama administration insert this new function within the bureaucracy and give it a lift. And I'm curious as to the decisions that have been made at the State Department and any that you might be aware of in the other agencies about where the online media director is getting placed, whether that makes a difference, and whether any staffing is being allotted to this new function and whether that matters.
Yeah, well, first, thanks for your nice words. I'm not going to take credit for all of it because there are a whole lot of people doing important work at the State Department, and at the end of the day, the person who deserves the credit there is Secretary Clinton, who's embraced this but has also pushed the department on this, which is invaluable. I can't speak for the entirety of the federal bureaucracy, of course. All I can comment upon is what I've observed, and what I've observed is that first at the top with the appointment of people like Anish Chopra and Vivek Kundra and Beth Novak and Susan Crawford and people in the White House new media operation like Macon Phillips and Katie Stanton. What I see is the bringing of the caliber of people into the federal government who, these are folks who are typically out there making enormous amounts of money, leading big companies, running state-level operations, who are not part of the federal bureaucracy. So at the top, part of what I think we see is a willingness to serve. And I think that is providing important administration-wide leadership. To speak for a second to what's happening at the department and agency level, and your specific question about where in the org, so to speak, new media lives, I think what we're seeing is a lot of talent being drawn to these departments and agencies. And I don't know who they should report to or what their title should be or anything like that. What is important is that when the secretary of X, whatever X is, wakes up in the morning and thinks about what he or she is trying to get done, one of the first things that they think about is technology or new media. And if they're any good executive, they're going to want to have an empowered and able person stewarding their new media and technology initiative. And if that's a direct report to the secretary, great. If that's 4 levels down, great.
Did you want to follow on that?
Yeah, I'd love to ask you a question that's really.
I want to get to your part of the panel.
In a moment, we're going to shift
There was something earlier.
I came to listen to you.
You used the phrase "push a message,"
Yeah.
and I wanted to just, and I was interested in your list, that people to gov. Now that's obviously something that Katie's working on, and other people, in the White House. But in the State Department context, one of the things we learned from Web 2.0, the best way to tell stories is through other people's stories, not by talking about yourself. So you think about something like American Idol, or what's Susan Boyle. This is Simon Cowell figured out this amazing platform that he could build where he could find interesting people who would go viral. And do you think about telling casting a net so that you can tell the story you want to tell through people that you find through crowdsourcing? Is that part of your thinking?
Yeah, we need to get there. We need to get there. It's going to take us time, and I think that could be very compelling. I have a feeling in 3 years. Today, you can always tell you're at dinner with Obama administration friends if you look around the table and a third of the people are tweeting, and another third are going, "Gee, I'm at a dinner. Is it appropriate for me to tweet?" So right now, everybody's talking about a handful of technologies, including Twitter. I have a feeling in 3 years we're going to be talking about some technologies that none of us, other than you, know what they are. And they're going to be doing some of they're going to be doing things like that. So the issue of crowdsourcing is an interesting one, and we've got to figure out how to do it in government. And
I was thinking, to your SWAT Valley, who would be the Susan Boyle of that SWAT Valley campaign? There's probably someone there who could make that go viral, and then you get 60 million people, texting. To 20222.
Well, look what this happened during the campaign with the Will I Am video, with the Yes I Can video, Yes We Can video. Somebody out there did something better than anything folks in Chicago could ever have produced. We saw it, we embraced it, we got very excited about it, and so what we now need to do is first of all, have an openness to that kind of edge innovation taking place and our embracing it. But secondly, creating an environment or conditions or programs or whatever it is to try to actually foster that.
Yeah.
So
right. We're gonna shift, having touched the surface of Diplomacy 2.0, 21st Century Statecraft. I want to turn to Tim to sort of kick off the second segment, which is the way the federal government should do Web 2.0, or what people from the left coast can teach the right coast about how to think more generally. You've talked about government as a platform. Could you explain what you mean by that?
Well, let me back up a little bit first by talking a little bit about my understanding of Web 2.0. I feel like even though I've been on the stump now for, 6 years ago we started the Web 2.0 events, I still don't think people entirely understand the change that we're going through. And new media, social media, is certainly part of it. But when I tried to define Web 2.0, the very heart of what I came up with was harnessing collective intelligence. And in particular, this idea that as the network becomes the platform, the power in the computer industry was going to go to people who get better at harnessing their users to add value to the systems they build. So the networks are fundamentally platform stories. Networks become more valuable the more people participate. And every company that succeeded, and this was kind of coming to the term Web 2.0, was like there was that first wave of the web, and there were all these companies that went down in flames. And it was after the dot-com bust we said Web 2.0, something distinguished the companies that survived, the Googles, the Amazons, the eBays, from the ones like Pets.com that didn't. Pets.com thought it was a broadcast medium. These other guys knew that it was about harnessing collective intelligence, literally building systems that get better the more people use them. And that idea of building a system that gets better the more people use it is the very heart of Web 2.0. And so when I started thinking about government and how to use this technology, that's what I'm thinking about. Because of course, when you really go back to the roots of our government and our nation, a government is a means of collective action. We got together and we said there's some things that we can't do alone. If you go back and read the writings of the Founding Fathers, they were wrestling with what things do we do individually, what things do we do collectively. And of course, technology gives us an amazing chance to update that vision. And how do we use the technology to bring people together to do things that we can't do alone? And what's unique in networks today, and I think that the real cutting edge of Web 2.0 is something that's really geeky. I'm going to throw out a term which you probably don't think of as the heart of Web 2.0. It's machine learning. Now, and what I mean by that is, and this relates to the sort of the scale issue that you mentioned, Peter, in well, actually, I guess there's a couple of things. One is
making scale into your friend instead of your challenge.
Yeah, if you think about how Google operates, they're dealing with the scale that White House open for questions kind of thing all the time. I mean, that's small scale.
Right.
And they're increasingly
so they don't have some little clerk reading those queries.
Yeah, exactly.
At least they're not supposed to be reading those
That's
queries.
right. And so really it becomes, they do have a search quality team that's testing that data stream all the time and evaluating whether the results they're giving are the right results. And then but they don't go back and then make a bunch of decisions and say, let's promote this one and not that one. Oh, actually, there's a secret. They actually do that. And if you actually do a Google search for O'Reilly, you'll find one of those cases. Turns out that O'Reilly, because of our early prominence on the web, breaks the Google search algorithm. And hey, there's actually a Fortune 500 company, O'Reilly Auto Parts, that didn't show up on the first page of Google results. So there's a very small fraction of Google pages that have split screen results, where one of them is sort of created out of the second manual
So you broke
stream.
the system all by yourself.
That's right.
That's pretty cool.
And Glacier National Park is another one. Who knew? The algorithms think that Glacier Bay Faucet Company, which makes toilets, is actually the most interesting search for Glacier Bay. So there's a few cases where they intervene, but mostly they adjust the algorithms. And I think we need to think about that in, for example, in areas like regulation. So that's a whole big part of this that we need to make sure we get that database expertise. The other piece that's so critical, and Craig Newmark I know is in the room, is user self-service. Craigslist, harnesses users to do a lot of the work of curating. And I know you guys are trying to harness that in many of the programs, but that really is part of the secret of so many of these systems, is the users are voting, not just explicitly, but often implicitly. And that's where the two converge, of course, is when it's implicit voting. Then systems that can detect a vote, like Google did when they said, oh, wait a minute, we know how to make better search results. Every time someone links, they're actually voting. Because nobody before Larry and Sergey figured that out in 1998 realized that there was a vote hidden in that system. And I think a lot of what we have to do is to start figuring out where the votes are actually hidden in some of the data that we have coming at us.
That's cool. So it's to create a more perfect union, collective intelligence. That's a political thing. Faiz, I want to turn to you. In my opening talk, I talked about the challenges of trying to do 2.0 in the federal government, that there's all this clearance, that you can't delegate too much to people because it might be 5 teenagers in a pickup truck who are going to cause you trouble. From our talk previously, you were a little more hopeful about what the government could do here. Could you?
I am hopeful. And part of the hope is that Alex is on the team. And behind the cool, calm, and collected demeanor of Alex is somebody who's very energetic and enthusiastic about these issues. It's great to have an advocate like him on the inside. And I think also noting the leadership here, President Obama, Secretary Clinton, people like Alec inside the administration, I think they've shown already a desire to take new ideas, break old habits of doing things, look to new ways of doing things, and that presents an opportunity for all of us here to have a good idea and present it, pass the baton over to them, and force them to take it up. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, and I should say that I come at this with a bit of a bias. I'm here as the editor of Think Progress, our blog here at the Center for American Progress, and we run this team of 15 people, and we've operated it for 4 years, one of the popular political news sites on the web. And we've worked within this institution and found a way to have an independent influence, voice, and impact that's outside CAP's own influence and impact. And in the same way, what I'd like to see develop in the White House and the State Department, places like inside the government, is for them to also develop their independent authority, voice, to reach out and build on the great potential for engagement that exists. And I think that the model that I look to is a two-way conversation that the government leads. If you're thinking of a two-way conversation that the government is leading, then you're in the driver's seat. You're setting the agenda. You're not punting over to the populace and saying, "Tell us what you're interested in." You're telling them, "Here are the things that we want to accomplish: maybe healthcare, energy transformation, diplomacy."
The mic faded for a second.
Did it fade out?
Just push it back.
Okay.
The technology is almost perfect in life.
You hear me now? No?
Do you have a hand mic to back up?
You want me to just go up here? Sorry about that.
Okay. Remember, so you were helping us be you were hoping the government would be more assertive in saying its words and building a platform where it's saying its things. I think
a two-way conversation that the government leads, and the goal here is engagement. You need to have people, as Mr. O'Reilly said, it's valuable when people participate. The platform is valuable when people participate, and I think from my own experience, a government site that would become valuable and participatory by others is one that is a news-driven site. A government site that says one of our primary missions is to inform and educate those of you in the Swat Valley, those of you in China, those of you in Venezuela. We want to inform you and educate you about our point of view. And part of that means taking a different philosophy to the information that you're posting online and saying, if we're a news-driven site, we're going to be breaking some information on this site that comes before the New York Times has learned about it, the Washington Post has learned about it, et cetera. You're going to be the first conveyor. And this is, in fact, what the administration did with the No Ruse message. It was conveyed first. It was broken on the White House site. And I think that's a great model. But then when you build off of that, and you're trying to get
I think in the State Department context, you want something that other people in other nations are engaging with you on. So it'll be a platform that exists in multiple languages, that gives people an opportunity to give you feedback on this platform that is valuable, that makes them feel like they own a part of the site as well. So in thinking about what are some of the tools that a site like this in my dream world would look like, well, there'd be maybe a tool that says, what are you reading? And you plug in a hyperlink, and we learn what articles you're reading on a particular given day, and we tell you the articles that we're reading on a particular given day. You split off a part of the site that says, here are the most valued comments that we've received in response to Ambassador Holbrook's comments to the Pakistani people.
I'm thinking, wouldn't it be awesome to actually have a comment from a foreign leader on a White House blog? Somebody should do that. They would get the total media high ground.
There's so many awesome ways to go, but I know that Peter is like gonna tell me all the restraints here.
I just, even if I'm a lawyer who likes to say yes, I'm a lawyer who was trained to say no occasionally, and so I'm just a little.
You're about to say no.
I'm going to ask a question that then, in a nice Socratic way, leads to the word no. And it has something to do with this, right? So what we see in politics is there's moneyed interest. There's people who have a stake in things. There's people who game the system. We've seen some of that already on the White House when legalized marijuana question went zooming way up high. But we can see it when you get into regulatory things where dollars are involved. The people with the most dollars at stake are going to be doing AstroTurf there instead of AstroTurf in Congress. So, the implicit and explicit voting might just be a new way for the people with money to be grabbing things. Should we worry about that, or are there ways to protect the system against that?
So I have a quick comment. You know that I was just recently reading Walter Isaacson's biography of Benjamin Franklin, and Ben Franklin was a practiced AstroTurfer. And so it was really interesting to me. It was a long tradition. It's not something new. And it may not be all bad. I mean, maybe the fact that the marijuana stuff shot to the top did, in fact, say something that there's a constituency for that issue.
I mean, the high ground, as you call it.
Yeah.
I don't think we should. I don't think we should be worried about AstroTurfers. Partly, from my own experience in dealing with this world, if you get people who are opposed to your agenda actively on your site contributing information, that spurs your own supporters to engage with them. And I think that that's an important element here, and one you should be comfortable taking on. I think some of the harder bureaucratic hurdles here that I wrote down are, I think, giving unprecedented authority to young staffers who, down the chain, who would have more freedom to post ideas, to make errors. The tolerance threshold for errors would have to be a little bit higher. These are the harder questions. And I think in Peter's paper here, he mentioned one of them. And let me just read from it real quickly. He says, now suppose a White House blogger or someone else answering comments on whitehouse.gov can't get a hold of the North Korea expert during the campaign. That could backfire. But in government, the consequences could be much more serious. What if North Korea didn't like the White House comment and decided to launch a missile attack on a neighboring country? That could obviously have more important negative consequences. My reaction to that was, first, that speaks ill of North Korea that they were launching a missile attack based on...
We've had some disagreements with them already, but go ahead.
Right, based on a blog post. I think there's some other problem there. But secondly, secondly, I think that if that occurred, there was a problem in that the organization, in this case the government, didn't explain what authority you would view the postings on that site by. That is, there was a mistranslation that people in North Korea thought that they were attributing far more authority to the postings of a 28-year-old North Korean-speaking blogger on the State Department site, rather than attributing the authority to which it was due, which is far less, a conversant who's interested in information and conveying it online and in some degree rabble-rousing, but is not to be interpreted as Hillary Clinton or President Obama. Certainly that presents opportunities for the government of various countries to say, you need to shut down these bloggers who are saying terrible things about me. But I think that's part of the opening up the dialogue that I'm interested in. If we engage in these sorts of things with Venezuela, for instance, you could see Venezuelans coming out and registering opinions that Hugo Chavez wouldn't like. But in fact, I think that if you use the right way, you leverage that as an opportunity to dive into the hard issues, to tackle them, and to have a more candid and frank exchange.
Okay, I'm gonna do one follow-up, and then we'll go. So a variation on the limits on government for clearance is the government isn't supposed to endorse individual companies. They're not supposed to pick winners and losers. There's all sorts of things like due process and fairness the government's historically supposed to be part of, and that can inhibit spontaneity. Right? You're the blogger who says, I just saw this cool thing. Here's my favorite app from the Apple App Store. I would think you all should use this. If the government is doing that, that could in some ways be getting the new function out that's very effective. But if the government's doing that, they've just endorsed a particular app on a particular company's app store, which is usually not what the government's supposed to be doing because of fairness, procurement, appearances, and all the rest. Am I being too 20th century and thinking we shouldn't mention the names of apps
Yes.
on an app store? Really?
I think so. I think one of the things that
Just a hang-up
again,
from the old days. Yeah.
I'm not in government, and I'm definitely not deep into the legal issues. But I do think that ultimately, if individuals in government cannot act as individuals, government will never be successful at social media, because it is about individuals connecting with other individuals. And you can, is not a broadcast medium with an official point of view. And frankly, you just got to figure out how to get over that and to let people speak, for themselves and be clear. And by the way, this is something I still remember. This is a tech story, but it's one that I was one of the most wonderful moments in my experience. This was it was a consortium called the X Consortium. It developed something called the X Window System. It was a bunch of big companies that were agreeing, that had working on standards for windowing systems. And this guy was saying, Apollo believes blah, 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 and then he suddenly says, well, I don't care what Apollo believes. This is the wrong choice, and we should be making this other, technical decision. And it was a fabulous moment because it was, he put out the company position, but he also made clear that it was not his position.
Do you apply that to lieutenants in the military also?
I think the military and intelligence probably have some very different rules, and I think certainly even in organizations.
There's this chain of command idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a chain of command. There's certainly context. I mean, certainly there are things that, like if an O'Reilly employee were to make a posting that was critical of something that we would do, I would want them to make clear that it was their opinion and not a company position. But I wouldn't want them not to be able to say it, to say, oh, you must toe the line. I mean, again, the authenticity of a conversation, I think, is central to social media. And, I know it will take a lot to get there, but we have got to figure out how that works with government and what are the right ways in which people can express, personal opinions.
I'll go to the question in a second. You were smiling during some of that. Do you have anything, Alec, on that?
No, I was just thinking about what was going to happen to that lieutenant.
Yeah, I just said, the general has his head in the wrong place. I mean, it's not a standard military approach.
The former lieutenant.
Well, but you got to understand.
They're also part of it is they're like you are right in making the point that context matters.
Yeah.
Because there are big differences between what happens, with our military and guys with their boots on the ground in Afghanistan versus an open dialogue about how we can increase exports in the International Trade Administration office at the Department of Commerce, and it's a brainstorming environment. I mean,
Sure.
The government is an enormous place with thousands of small contexts for open dialogue, and there are different levels of appropriateness and openness.
I totally agree with that.
For each of those, and part of it too is you can use some of these tools for an intra-department or intra-team engagement that may not be public about. Anyway.
Yeah.
We had a hand here. Yeah. Is it Brian?
This conversation has
Could you identify yourself, please?
Brian Cahan, CCIA and University of Michigan. This conversation has been assuming that we're talking about what the government would do directly. Is there opportunity for the government to encourage neutral or academic third parties to start conversations going in which government people will participate. And in those contexts, it would be a lot easier to make clear that they are participating as individuals, but that they are also helping to get this dialogue going in a context where you've got experts moderating it, or it's experimenting with the digital infrastructure in some way. And that's also a way of leveraging the government's resources, because we can't expect government to handle the entire dialogue on itself.
Reactions? Faiz?
Yes, I think that's a great point. One of the ways to engage with a lot of people that the government could do very quickly is to go where the traffic is. So in my world, I know domestically, you would be engaging with places like the Huffington Post, with Talking Points Memo, with Andrew Sullivan's blog, which the administration is doing, but apply this globally. How about talking to a random Pakistani blogger who happens to agree with you on reforming the judicial system, and you send Ambassador Holbrooke to give him an exclusive interview? You've elevated the prominence and importance that blogger now has. And now people are going to be visiting him in that region, and not only domestically, but in that region. And you've basically taken an ally, plucked him out of nowhere, and thwarted him into great prominence. And I think that's the kind of thing
I
that
totally
there's great
agree with
opportunities.
that. Brilliant. Yeah.
So I just got two quick reactions. One is the positive part, which is it builds traffic. You get the Pakistani blogger visibility, and before we called it new media, the government had media offices, press offices, and they went to where the traffic was, called the New York Times or CBS News or whatever it was. That was a normal part of outreach to get their message out. And if the traffic today's on Huffington Post, then the next thing you know, they'll let Faiz into the White House press room, which they've actually done this year. So the bloggers are in the White House press room, and that's part of where the traffic is. But here's the lawyer caution, just for like a second, just so that people can keep cringing. There's a thing called the FACA, the Federal Advisory Committee Act, which structures when a government agency gets somebody in the outside to work with them on a sort of continuing basis. And it goes back to these fairness due process ideas that if we picked 5 people to always help us, that might be a really good 5 people, or it might be the 5 biggest lobbyists who bribe their way in. And we're so scared about the 5 lobbyists who bribed their way in that a lot of normal partnerships for the rest of the world look like possibly problematic things for the government agencies. And how to get past that is one of the conceptual pieces I think we're going to have to do, because these are all partnerships. If the network and the platform is what everything's about, the government's got to play in these big networks without making it suddenly be a legal violation the moment they go where the traffic is. Take another question. Yeah.
Hi,
Got a mic. Here?
He's up
Third
there.
low. We had
Over in the
a
back.
mic in the back. Go ahead, and then we'll take the next one here. Then we'll do a couple of online questions.
I'm Zach from the Center's campaign to end genocide and human rights abuse. Enough. You talked a lot about empowerment of people and sort of not just the government to government, but the people to government translation that happens in this medium. How can the State Department, as an act of diplomacy 2.0, look at things like the May 5th movement in Egypt last year, where there was an online forum created in country to advocate for some sort of change, and there was quite a gathering, 100,000, 80,000 individuals went to that space. How could, say, the State Department go out there and find these new media occurrences and events that are happening and amplify our allies and use them strategically to advance whatever goals we may find are applicable in the situation?
Let me respond to that by making the point that I'm specifically not talking about May 5th, so I'm not going to address that at all. But to the larger question you have of how can we support how can we support individuals who build networks, who are advocating for things that we support, this is something we think a lot about, and it's not easy. First of all, because these things oftentimes are started by sort of what the general term is unlikely superstars. So somebody who's not a big public, doesn't have a big public persona, can oftentimes spark something that then becomes big. So there's no way of knowing who or what is going to spark something big that happens. So I'll give you an example that I will speak to, which is the protest against FARC, which took place in Colombia, which was started more through the use of social media tools, including Facebook, than anything else. I mean, after that happened, we at the State Department, said, all right, who started this? How did this happen? And, we eventually found the young guy who started it, but it wasn't about him. It was about the network and about the network of networks that then created this massive global protest against FARC, which did more damage against FARC than perhaps had been done against it at any point during the previous decade. So the challenge, before I say what I think the opportunity is, the challenge is you can't just track a bunch of high-profile people and wait for them to spark something, because these are innovations that come at the edges. And when I mean the edges, I mean the far outer edges. Something can happen anywhere, as in the case of the FARC protest, where it wasn't some mini celebrity that started something. But in terms of what the opportunity is, I think this is where we go squarely to 21st century statecraft. What does it mean to be a public diplomacy officer in the 21st century versus, the Graham Greene era? The Graham Greene era public diplomacy officer would drink scotch with, the reporter who was going to write the article the next day and talk to him about what he was going to write before it was written. That's not the way it works today. That's not the way, there are not one or two publications that dominate communications in a country in the age of blogs, in the age of social networks. So what do you then do in the face of that? What you then do is make sure that our public diplomacy officers are not just engaging with that person who's going to write the front page article, but they also understand the blogosphere. They're also understanding what happens at the net roots level in a country. So it requires a new skill set for 21st century public diplomacy officers. There aren't two radio stations and three newspapers that you need to follow anymore. You need to understand sort of the wave of data sets that wash over you from the blogosphere and elsewhere. And so a lot of that really goes to how we train the next generation of public diplomacy officers.
On the blogs, it sounds like. We have this question, and we'll go to online questions.
Yeah. Randy Ryland from Ryland Digital. Going back to the SWAT campaign, it's certainly a laudatory campaign. I think the interesting thing to me, though, is once people make the contribution, they want to see what are the ramifications of that contribution. And that gets to something Tim was saying. Ideally, there's a viral video at the other end saying, here's the happy ending to the story. So if you go down that road, at what point do you bridge into manipulating the message, or people assuming or starting to feel like here's the government putting out propaganda about what's happening with this campaign? I mean, not to say that would happen, but I think that there's that inclination sometimes to feel that you're controlling what people hear of the results.
I'm not sure entirely how to respond to that. In this case, I'll speak specifically to the text SWAT example. I mean, it's a very simple, straightforward fact. There are 2.3 million people who have been displaced. We are lining up donations to help the UN High Commission on Refugees provide them with tents, food, sustenance. Sure that there's a certain segment of society that will always sort of look with a great deal of skepticism at anything that we do. And so, we're not always going to have 100% approval ratings on every action that we take, and there's always going to be some questioning of our motives in anything we do. I think, honestly, the best response is just to do the right thing. And, I think that if we can build trust globally based on what our actions actually are, then the degree to which people believe us and are compelled by the messages that we're trying to share globally, I think they'll be better received then. And so, I don't think we're ever going to get to the point where everybody buys into everything we say. But that's the nature of 6 billion people on a planet with 6 billion different points of view, I guess.
Just a quick response. One, you said do the right thing. There's a fabulous Mark Twain quote in that regard. He said, do the right thing. you'll gratify some people and astonish the rest. But I was also thinking, you mentioned propaganda. And I think, one of the counters to propaganda is that the government doesn't have control of media in the way that it does in propaganda-driven regimes. So let's just say that they were to have, here's a lovely success story from the campaign. It's going to get picked up or not, depending on whether it catches the global mood. And the, fact is, if the government puts it out and nobody cares, it's no more propaganda than any of the other messages that are out there. It's only propaganda, I think, when you really have media control.
I would just say that since you're going to already be perceived as doing propaganda, just do it better.
Yeah.
Just do it really well. I mean, that is like put out videos that are of high quality, of high interest, news content that is very interesting. People are going to have to go there to see it first. Just do it really well. And then, of course, confound expectations by allowing them to give you some feedback. And I don't see it as a
I have a
problem.
couple of online questions. The first is for Tim. What is Tim O'Reilly holding in his hand? Is it a little blue book for the revolution?
No, it's just, hey, I'm a publisher, and I produce my own blank notebook. Sorry, so it was actually a giveaway from one of our events that we yeah. Anyway,
but this is the next. I have several questions from online that are all on the same thing, and it might be that Tim takes the first. They're questions about data.gov and where you see the underlying infrastructure. What needs to happen from your experience? Because you talk to a lot of techies who handle huge data sets. What needs to happen to take these first steps for data.gov and bring it out so it's more used to more people?
Well, I think the biggest story on data.gov, first of all, they're making first steps, but I think there's a real opportunity to tell the story better. How many government data sets are already in wide use? I've been kind of advocating there be kind of like a data.gov app store, so to speak, where we start showing off how government data is used. Just to give two examples, I was just talking with a college professor this morning. Turns out that the Princeton Review, which is this thing that rates colleges, he said there's this great database called IPEDS, government database. Who knew that the Princeton Review is based on a government database? I think about my young friends who are into kite surfing, and you go to ikitesurf.com. Where does that data come from? Where they're looking at the wave height and the wind. It's from NOAA. And there's all these services out there in our society today that are based on government data, and the government gets no credit. And I think we need to start celebrating the fact that data.gov already is part of the fabric of our society and is doing tremendous work.
Well, the happy story about the federal government and uses of data. I mean, so Bureau of Labor Statistics, there's 100,000 things that have been done for a long time.
Yeah.
And sometimes we think whenever we put a new name on it that it's the first time that these things are happening.
That's right. Or think about, you go to finance.yahoo.com and you go check out, where do those 10Ks come from, that were over there in the sidebar when you want to get the historical statistics.
Right.
It's all through the fabric of our public web, and the government gets no credit. And I think part of what we have to do is just
So
connect
part
the
of it is
dots.
to realize what we have. Are there next steps? Do you see, 3 years from now, Alec, are there things 3 years from now or 5 years from now that ought to be out there, that can be out there, that you think are really big news in that direction?
I actually had a question along that line for Mr. O'Reilly. I think
Tim.
Alec mentioned the mobile telephony is going to be one of the most critical communications tools of the next 3 to 5 years. Do you see any possibility of bridging the digital divide via mobile telephony coming up on the horizon?
I guess I would say that it's absolutely going to be the bridge for the digital divide. And we should definitely be thinking, not even beyond the mobile phone. When people ask me what's the future, UI for it's going to be cloud services. I'll probably be wearing a pair of glasses with a heads-up display at some point. You think about one of the big trends I see is machine learning against sensor data. And you go, that may seem awfully strange, but when you try the Google mobile app and you put it to your ear and you say pizza, it's doing speech recognition on a microphone. It's coordinating that with a search database. It's got a location database where it's picking up the location automatically from the phone. There's 3 sensors right there, and then it comes back and says the 3 pizza places around here are such and such. There's an amazing application already out there for the Android. It's a wiki travel guide. You point your camera at some historical monument, and it brings up on the display, information about what you're looking at. The camera is tied to a machine learning, image recognition database in the cloud. These kinds of things are coming out of science fiction, and I really do think that we're going to be in this ambient environment where we have mobile devices, we have cloud apps, and the broadband vision of people sitting in couch surfing or whatever is not really the future that we need to be preparing for. It's a mobile future, and it's a smartphone future, and then beyond smartphones even.
There's a book called Rainbow's End, a science fiction novel by Werner Vinge that does a lot of what you just said in novel form. So there's an endorsement here because I'm not in the government. We're going to wrap up by asking for comments from each of the three people on the panel. Maybe to help guide the wrap-up comments, things you're most excited about or the challenges you worry most about for getting this right in the government.
Yeah, what I'm most excited about is with the mandate to figure out how we can communicate differently with the globe's citizens. What I'm most excited about, literally with the job ahead of me and of my Obama administration colleagues, is figuring out how to do that and how to do it so that it's not just one way. So with the no ruse message, for example, we did a great job in one-way communication. And what was really cool was to see what Persian-speaking people around the globe then did with it. They then repurposed the content. They then, took pieces of it and reblogged it and reposted it and did very interesting things with it. I think that was just sort of scratching at the edge, though, of interactivity. So in that case, we put a message out, and the citizens then had some interactivity around it. What I think is interesting is to contemplate how social media can be more deliberately layered on top of messages that we get out, using new and different ways. To the second part of your question, what gives me what I'm most worried about is I'll give two examples. One, there's no legal framework for any of this. So a lot of my friends who work in new media spend more time talking to lawyers than they do to geeks. And the reason why they spend more time talking to lawyers than geeks is that the underlying statute are, this piece of legislation from 1984, which governs, XYZ, pieces of new media that we're trying to practice. There's this thing called Smoot Hunt or Smith Hunt or something like that, from a decades-old piece of legislation, which is which is a huge deal at the State Department. So there's analog age statute, analog age laws, which are attached to things that we're trying to make happen in the 21st century. And it's very hard, and that's part of why some of what Peter Swire wrote was so important, was because it was people beginning to do some original writing and thinking from a legal perspective on these issues. The second thing that I won't say I'm worried about, but it'll be interesting to see what the reaction is what happens the first time a big mistake is made. When we made mistakes on the Obama campaign, it was a hiccup, and we were on to the next thing. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens when we try something in the new media space and it either A, really falls flat, or B, something bad happens. And hopefully, not hugely bad, but if we get something well short of the missile strike, something well short of your missile. But but social media is a messy space, and government doesn't oftentimes lend itself to messy spaces. And so far, things have gone very well. But I wonder. I'm going to be interested to see what happens once we make a mistake.
Yeah, moving away from social media, specifically, the thing I'm most excited about and most trying to encourage is really a rethinking of how government builds systems. When you look at the Apple iPhone with 35,000 applications in 9 months, you've got to remember Apple didn't write those applications. They built a framework. And I think so much government IT in the past has been around building complete end-to-end closed solutions. And a lot of what Web 2.0 and open source and many other systems like that teach us is if you build a minimal system that's open-ended that people can build on, then something really, really different happens. And that really, I think, is the heart of the opportunity with what the Obama team is trying to do with technology today. It really is to go back to first principles and actually start to establish the government as infrastructure for the country. It's really the platform. That's why the theme of this event that I'm running this fall, the Gov 2.0 Summit, is really government as a platform. A platform is something that we in the private sector can build on. It's not something that the government says, hey, here it is. Here's the solution. And I think a lot of this new thinking is really, how do we create a new partnership between the government and the people? This is by and for the people. And I think we have this opportunity to get back to those first principles that our country was built on and rediscover them through technology. And it's going to be hard, and a lot of things are going to get broken, and a lot of things, as you pointed out, are this old stuff that's going to be in the way. And I think there's really going to be new institutions that are needed. I think there's a real challenge because networks effectively create new horizontal connections. And of course, institutions, try to, the existing institutions say, wait, this is my turf. And of course, this is this new lateral means that breaks all the silos. And I think we're in for a messy, exciting time with a lot of potential. And I think what I'm hoping is that we'll all rise to embrace it and say, let's figure out how to use this opportunity to build a better country.
Cool.
I'm most excited about the fact that you have desire, tools, information coming to a head in an environment in which you have the right leadership in government. And that's just a critical opportunity, both in Congress and the administration, people who are willing to think of new ways of doing things, because oftentimes many of us are talking to each other and you don't have an administration or leadership that's willing to even accept what you're talking about. I think some of the concerns, to echo Alec's point, if the Presidential Records Act is one of the inhibiting factors why Barack Obama couldn't have a BlackBerry, there's something wrong. If White House staffers can't instant message each other or instant message the public in a way that the rest of us can, there's still something wrong. So I hope that we have new thinking on this underlying statutes, and a lot of that has to come from Congress. And I'm hoping, we have a transition of sorts going on in Congress too, with people now starting to learn and understand the new media environment. But quite honestly, there's a lot of old guard there too. So I think there needs to be a little bit of an understanding there in Congress about the need for a new statutory legal framework to govern these issues. I think the other really big concern that I have sometimes is, I don't want to say you only get one opportunity at this, but the first opportunity you get at this is so critical. And if your first effort to reach out through Web 2.0 tools is half-hearted, isn't interesting, isn't compelling, doesn't grab people, then it's going to be very hard to come back 5, 10 years down the line and say, we're relaunching, we're doing it new, we're going to break the old ways and try to grab you once again. The first opportunity is so critical. People are paying attention, they're really interested in what you have to say, and so I hope we make sure that we get it right the first time.
Well, one thing just to sum up is that one of the words for this year is supposed to be change, and I think we're seeing an unbelievable rate of change and the opportunity for an awful lot more in the next few years. Alec, Tim, and Faiz are part of that, and we thank you, the panel, and thank you for coming very much.
Thank you.